All right, good evening. This is Courtney Rhodes, Vice Chair of Planning Committee, and we are starting the Charlotte Mecklenburg Planning Commission Planning Committee meeting. It is December 19th, 2023. It's about 5:07. And so we're going to go ahead and start with introductions. So we'll start to my left.
Robin Stewart, Planning Commission.
Erin Shaw, Planning Commission.
RJ Harvey, Planning Commission.
Melissa Gaston, Planning Committee. And just wanted to state that our fearless chairperson, Andrew Blumenthal, is under the weather and he did not want to get us sick. So he opted to stay at home, which we're thankful for. Get better soon, Andrew. And now for our introductions for staff.
Alicia Osborne, Planning.
Zania Duhaney, Planning.
Kathy Cornett, Planning.
Erin Henson, Planning. Bethany Fritz, County Real Estate.
Jason Pauling, Planning.
And Katie Lloyd, Mecklenburg County Park and Recreation.
Perfect. Thank you for everyone for attending. Now we have a couple of mandatory referrals. The committee has two following options: to discuss the mandatory referrals, or the option 2 of no additional comments on the mandatory referrals. Do we have any additional comments or questions for any of the referrals? All right, so I'm going to ask if one of our members could make a motion.
This is Commissioner Gaston. I make a motion. The Planning Committee reviewed mandatory referral 23-48 and 23-49 on December 19th, 2023, and have no additional comments for the submitting agency.
Harvey, second.
Right, motion properly by Melissa, Commissioner Gaston, and properly second by Commissioner Harvey. All in favor? All right, well, that passes unanimously. Oh, yes, I'm sorry. Oh, also the minutes from the previous meeting. May I have a motion to approve the minutes as read?
Motion to approve. Shaw.
Harvey, second.
All right, motion, properly motioned by Shaw and seconded by Harvey. All in favor?
Aye.
All right, that was unanimous as well. Now we will move to the Greenway update, which will be from Katie.
So I'll either talk really fast or maybe go through some slides pretty fast. So has everyone here been on a Mecklenburg County Greenway Trail? Yes. Okay, good. Woo. Online, hopefully. Okay. Next slide. All right, so today we're going to go generally over Greenway trails. If you've been on one, you probably get it, but I'll go into a little bit more detail, talk a little bit about the history of development. Most of our trails are fairly new to our system. Talk about current projects and future projects, as well as land acquisitions. Some of the later slides you may recognize from the Planning Commission meeting last month. So we can go over those pretty quickly. All right. So if you don't know, greenways are vegetated buffers that are along our riparian corridors. So Mecklenburg County has been either buying up or getting through the land dedication process a lot of the land along our creeks and streams. Actually, about 75% of all of our park and recreation property abuts one of the creeks or streams in Mecklenburg County. We activate those spaces. They have a lot of benefits beyond the trail. They serve wildlife, floodplain, ecological benefit, but then we activate those as linear parks through the development of our Greenway Trail program. Next slide. And they are consistently over the last 20 years, the #1 most requested amenity by Park and Recreation. And so the top line here are requests for paved trails, and the second line is unpaved trails, which could be our mountain bike trails or nature preserve trails. And we know that these are the most requested because they are used for so many different reasons: transportation, recreation, all the great reasons. but also because they serve all ages and abilities, where a sports field might serve, someone in elementary school to high school or someone on a competitive team. Anybody can use a greenway trail. Next slide. And so just to give you an idea of what our greenway system includes, typically the trails we're building are 10 to 12 foot wide paved trails in either asphalt or concrete. Wherever possible, we're keeping those trail systems separated from vehicular traffic by utilizing existing roadway bridges or culverts under roadways. We don't have too many over the roadways, grade separated crossings for many reasons. One, they're kind of expensive, but also people don't tend to like to use them if they have to climb pretty high. We also have a expensive series of wayfinding signage that not only tell you where you are, where you're going, but we've recently incorporated some additional information on our signage, which we're implementing now to help with emergency services and locating people if they were to have an emergency on the trail. Next slide. Typically, we use prefabricated steel, usually Corten or weathering steel bridges for all of our major creek crossings. There's a competition among some of our project managers right now to have the longest bridge we ever built. So stay tuned on that. We're getting really close to 200 feet, painfully close. I think Sugar is going to beat out the other ones, which is my project. So that's good. And then we also do boardwalks. So some of our older trail systems are stick-built wooden boardwalks with wooden decks. And anyone who's been on some of our older trails know that those can get pretty slick. They also degrade. It's just the nature of the material. So we have a lot of maintenance costs that go into those. So everything we've been building in the last 5 to 8 years are typically a wooden stick-built system, but with a concrete deck. So that deck lasts a lot longer. And also it's just it's easier to maintain. It's not slick like the wooden deck. And if anyone has questions, feel free to stop me. So, which we'll get into a little bit later. That is our new standard. And then we're trying to get funding to go back and retrofit all of our older trails to this new standard to address some of those issues we have. And then we use low water crossings and other types of bridge crossings. All right. And then the other things you may find on a greenway trail: benches, seating, water fountains, viewing areas. Has anyone been to Marsh Park? I'm down in Pineville. This is off the section of Little Sugar Creek Greenway, just north of the Polk Historic Site. We partner often with county and city stormwater services to do creek restorations. Usually we try to time those construction sequences so they're either out in front of us or we're building it together. And we have multiple projects right now that are joint construction projects with stormwater services. If you ever go check out Long Creek Greenway in the North Lake area, that's one where you'll see both projects simultaneously. We also work just as the city does with the Percent for Art ordinance, and we incorporate public art wherever possible on our trail system. And then, of course, parking and restrooms where we have the land or the funding to build them. We often, we have a lot of constraints by building our greenway systems. As I mentioned, they are beside our creeks and streams, and in the for the most part, they're within the floodplain and sometimes the floodway. So they are in an area that is ecologically very sensitive. Anything we build within that space has to follow, has to be permitted through federal and state agencies to not negatively impact the floodplain. So we try not to create any kind of rise in the FEMA managed floodplain, but also any kind of other wetlands or sensitive ecological areas. We often work with the Corps and other agencies as well. So permitting can be a challenge. I'll go back to land acquisition. Budget constraints, they're so expensive. They keep getting more and more expensive. And I feel like every project is more complicated than the last, and therefore exponentially more expensive. We're also, as we've seen in the last 5 or so years with the pandemic, with supply chains, with shortages of labor, it's been hard to estimate projects, and we're having to, in the back end, cut some of the scope of our projects. But land acquisition probably is one of the hardest constraints for us as staff. For any greenway trail project that could be 1 mile to 1.5 miles, we may have 20 or more parcels that we're hitting along the way. So that is a lot of transactions and a lot of time. And at the very end, I'll show you a slide that kind of gives you an idea of that time. A lot of time that can go into it. She knows. We like to say land acquisition can take anywhere from like 2 to 3 months to 10 years. So, or more, oftentimes more. So it can really impact our schedule. history. Oh, it's up here. Anyone know I chose this slide of this picture? I feel like we'll never have snow again in Mecklenburg County. So it's in the history. One day, we'll never have that picture again. I mentioned a little bit about kind of what greenways are. It was first kind of envisioned within Charlotte and Mecklenburg in 1966 through the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Master Plan for Recreation. And they recommended these facilities as logical natural elements useful in creating a sense of physical form and order within the city. You guys are pretty familiar with our street grid, which I would not describe it that way. But the greenway system may one day be somewhat more logical and connected and orderly because it does follow those creek systems. Though we started talking about them in the 60s, it wasn't until 1979 that we had our first trail on the ground. And this was an unpaved section through McAlpine Creek Park. Has anyone ever been out to McAlpine Creek Park? So a lot of it still kind of is very much as it was originally constructed in 1970s. And that's often used actually for 5K cross country as well. And so kind of going on to the next slide. Oh, I will say that the first official Greenway Master Plan was completed in 1980. So just after that first project was constructed. And it wasn't until 2021 that we had the first 50 miles on the ground. And then today we have about 70. Next slide. So each color in the next couple slides is a different decade, just to give you an idea of how it has developed over time. In the 70s, you know, we had these first couple unpaved trails. Slow down in the 80s. We started ramping back up a tiny bit in the 90s, and some like really important loved sections of trail got built in these decades. Next slide. But we were up to about 13 miles at that point. In the 2000s, we really started ramping up construction, adding another 28 miles in that decade. And then in 2010s, again, kind of keeping that steady pace. And some of these, we were also converting some of those original unpaved trails into paved trails. And if anyone wants to talk about why unpaved trails don't work well in the floodplain, it's because sediment is the #1 polluter to our creeks and streams. And if we have an unpaved trail and we're adding any kind of like gravel or anything, we can cause additional erosion and additional sediment into the streams. All right, so it depends. And then some recently completed projects. I mentioned Long Creek Greenway up in the North Lake area. You can check that out. We have one project that opened last year and another 2 miles that will hopefully be finished in January. The Little Sugar Creek by the Polk site. This sculpture is near that marsh park that I mentioned in Pineville. You can park on Lightner Drive if you want to see it. It's a really cool sculpture. Our brand new section of Little Sugar that gets you all the way down to South Carolina. Which is really beautiful, and some great sections of boardwalk out there. If you could take Little Sugar, which is about 17 miles from Noda all the way down to South Carolina, you'll kind of be surprised at how much the landscape changes along that corridor. We're working on multiple segments of McDowell up in the Huntersville area, Walker Branch down in Steel Creek, and Barton in the University City area. All right, is that okay, Greenway projects. All right, so I mentioned we have about 70 miles on the ground today. In addition to that 70 miles, we typically, for our master plan and our record keeping, we only count the mainline trail miles. But for every mile of Greenway, we may have another 1/4 mile of access trail that connects that trail to neighborhoods and to commercial areas. So to those 70 miles, we have about 21.5 miles of access trails. And then in working with CDOT and others, there's an additional 29 miles of what we call urban trails on the streets or along rail corridors as well. We currently have over 16 miles in active construction. So there is a lot of Greenway construction and more than ever before throughout the county. And another nearly 16 miles that's in design, moving towards construction. Yeah, that's fine. How am I doing on time? Okay, cool. These are all of our projects that are in active construction. I'll pause here. Anyone have any trails they've been waiting on that they want to ask any specific questions about? There's a lot. It's kind of all over the place.
I have a non-specific question,
Okay.
but have you all been able to complete like specific mapping of what exists? I feel like in the past I've tried to sort of find the mapping of the trails, and I know they're developing probably maybe faster than they can be mapped, but I'm just curious, for folks that want to enjoy them, what's the best resource to, have an idea of what's open, what's paved, what's, kind of how to navigate them.
That's a good question, and one we get quite often. So there's a couple of resources. One is just go to parkandrec.com, which it'll get you to the county's park and recreation website. And from there, there's kind of two main things. There's a Greenway tab, which will break up each trail into the trail name, like Little Sugar, Toby, all those. And within that, there are specific section maps. These are PDF maps you can download. For Little Sugar, there's 17 miles of trails. So that's not all on one map, though. A lot of people want us to make that map, and we will one day, I promise. So you might be able to break it up into different segments and kind of see how it works. And there's also something called the Park Explorer that you can go to, and that's a GIS application. And you can get to that from that same County Park and Rec website. And through the Park Explorer, you can see all of our Greenway trails. You can also on that site filter different park amenities. So if you're into pickleball or into basketball, you can filter which of our facilities offers that. And it just gets you an easier way to kind of find your way around. Thank you. All right, next slide. So these two projects I did want to highlight. Both of these are mostly paved and honestly for staff painfully close to being complete. But we're just finalizing some repairs to the pavement, working on the shoulders and the other closeout. So both of these hopefully will be substantially complete in January, which will help add to our trail mileage as well. These three projects are all nearly ready to bid. And in the first few months of the 2024, all three of these projects should go out to bid and move into active construction. And then the rest of these are in design. I think all of them either have some real estate component that we're working on or some coordination. Mallard Creek project, we're working with Charlotte Water to coordinate timing on that construction. And so those will eventually go out to bid, but are in active design. And then these are our new Greenway Trail projects that were recently funded in our fiscal year 2024 to 2028 capital improvement plan. We have not yet started active design on these because funding doesn't start till 2026 for some, up to 2028. And so the one thing I want to point out here is that I mentioned, the first trail wasn't built until nearly 1980. So we're hitting just currently the first time where we're having to think comprehensively about capital reinvestment in the Greenway Trail system. We have a lot of old parks that we've done significant reinvestment to, but we've never, from a capital side of things, had to reinvest in our Greenway Trail system. So, within the 5-year CIP, there are 2 new sections of new Greenway Trail we're building on Campbell and Irvins. Both of these are really important for the east side of Mecklenburg County. Campbell will connect existing Campbell Creek Greenway and McAlpine Creek Greenway up to the new Eastland development and to Campbell Creek Park. And Irvins Creek Greenway will connect a newly completed project in Matthews down to McAlpine Creek Greenway and that whole system. So both of these will have some really important connections and fill some important gaps in that McAlpine Campbell urban system. And then the next 4 projects, while they won't offer or add new trail miles to our counts, they will significantly rehab and reinvest in these 4 really important and well-loved trails. So the first 3 make up the entire lower McAlpine McMullen trail system, where we have a lot of old wooden boardwalks that we spend a lot of time repairing, as well as Torrance Creek is a project where it's a lot of boardwalk that needs to be replaced to our new standard. All right, I think I went through a lot of this when we met at the larger planning commission, so I won't spend too much time on it. But as you know, a lot of our decisions lately and then through the CIP have been guided by MEC Playbook, which is our comprehensive park and recreation master plan. And it's around these 4 guiding principles, which is commit to equity, evolve and grow, tell more stories, and move beyond boundaries. Next slide. Thinking about the implementation highlights from MEC Playbook. These elements are what guided our decision through the CIP, in addition to additional public engagement that we've got. So thinking about reinvestment versus investment, taking care of what we already have, but also expanding the Greenway system, which we heard time and again is still super important to residents. And then specifically in MEC Playbook, we were able to rank Greenway Trail projects by these four criteria. One is, does it connect to existing trails? And this was a criteria that was super important from our Greenway Advisory Council, and thinking that the more connections it provided, the more it fills gaps. So there are certain projects like the Irvins project that fill a gap between two existing segments, which improves both of those segments and expands the reach of all of our existing trails. Does it require less land acquisition? And that's based on a parcel or a transaction number. So it may be 3 large parcels, but that's still better to us than, say, 20 small parcels, because no matter the size of the easement or the acquisition, it still kind of takes the same effort from a staff perspective. And then from an equity perspective, does it serve the priority communities or fill the gaps that were identified in MEC Playbook? And then finally, does it expand partner opportunities? And so this kind of just breaks down a little bit more of that, and we can send out these slides too if you want to read any more about this or ask any questions. So you guys saw the map of all of the CIP projects. These are the specific Greenway Trail projects that were funded between 2024 and 2028. In addition to the 2 new projects I mentioned, we also had to get additional capital funding to fill budget shortfalls on other active Greenway projects that we were already in design on through previous CIPs. And so then this is all the projects in the 2024-28 CIP. All right, land acquisition. So I mentioned land acquisition, is hard for all of Park and Recreation, but for Greenway Trail projects in particular, it is so difficult, and it's kind of a lot of work, because one holdout from a parcel perspective can hold up a 2-mile trail project, unless we're going to start breaking it up into different phases. So in MEC Playbook, we talk a lot about, filling gaps in our system, but we're also trying to enhance the Greenway network by buying those key properties that are gaps in our current ownership. Next slide. And specifically looking at kind of our gap areas. This really focuses more on parks, but it also goes into the ranking, into how we approach the Greenway acquisition process as well. But for you guys, a lot of the land that we get for Greenway trails happens through the land development and the rezoning process. So Park and Recreation staff review all City of Charlotte rezonings, and then any land development project that is assigned to us by city staff. So in that, we are typically making 3 asks. One is dedication for future Greenway trails, and we have been making this ask for many decades and have had a lot of success with this request, because often it is the land that they are not actively developing anyway. And so usually we're trying to get about 100-foot wide easement on the creek, beside the creek. And this often is the same space as their water quality swim buffers. In some case, we're asking for more area if they have a larger floodplain, or if there's some known constraints. We're also asking from that 100-foot area for additional access from that space up to whatever development they are creating. We're also, in the last few years, started asking more for developable parkland. So this is for any development over 20 acres, asking for about 5% of that for developable parkland. And while our Greenway dedications can be within the tree save area, we are asking for this parkland to be not only upland, but not in tree save. And then, of course, access between any of the developments to our existing parks or greenways. And so I mentioned earlier a slide. This is Long Creek Greenway Phase 1 and 2. And every color on here shows you a different decade that we acquired the property to build this trail. And so starting in the 80s was when we started acquiring property in this corridor, and it took from there to the 2020s to get the trail on the ground. So definitely patience is critical, and a lot of the decisions we're making from a land acquisition standpoint today are for those trails 20 to 30 years from now. A couple of resources going back to your question. This is Park Explorer. And then you can also see our full Greenway master plan on our site as well. All right, any questions?
Thank you so much, Katie. I have a couple of questions. So it is good to know about the mashup when it comes to the repairs of the stormwater, and really getting ahead when it comes to developments and new developments. I guess my question to you is, how widely is that known during you almost spit out your drink, during the rezoning process? Because I know that that's a large point of contention for a lot of residents is about, what about the stormwater? I'm having issues with my stormwater. Are you guys consulted during that process? Because I was on zoning and I did not know that. But are you guys pulled in on the back end when it comes to that?
So we, there's actually a group called the Creek Coordination Group that we meet quarterly, and it's every municipal group that works in the area of the creeks. So city stormwater, county stormwater, Charlotte water, there's a lot of sewer pipes down there, us and some others. So we're coordinating very regularly on our capital projects and our capital investment. A lot of the projects we're specifically collaborating with are the county stream restoration, and in some cases, the city stream restoration. So these are larger capital projects, not necessarily the same as like the pipe infrastructure or the roadside stormwater infrastructure that we aren't as involved with. It is the larger like riparian investments where we may have a very eroded stream channel that is causing serious pollution from a sediment standpoint to the stream channel, and they are basically laying back the creek.
Gotcha.
Mhm.
And then I have two more questions. So I love the signs and the mile markers. I used to run on the greenways like 3 times a week. And the one thing that I wanted to ask when it comes to safety, what are some thoughts or what are some things that are going into play for the overall safety? As a female running on the greenway, I just encountered a lot of things. You would just encounter just unsafe things, wildlife, but you can't control that. You're running on the greenway, but people, and that can be quite unsafe. And so sometimes, depending on the time of day, I would opt to do it. Are you guys looking into any things like cameras or security or any of those sorts of things that could help to monitor when you're on the greenway?
So there's a couple points here. So the vast majority, so we work with CMPD a good bit and thinking about the crime that may happen on greenways or in parks. The vast majority of crime that gets reported on greenway trails or in parks is actually in the parking lots. So we have a lot of theft from automobiles that happen there. And so that's where a lot of the camera infrastructure is focused into those areas where we statistically know that crime is happening. For Greenway system, I mean, we have 70, if you count access trails, 90 miles of trail. We don't have the infrastructure and the funding to have cameras on that entire stretch, but we do have park rangers, park operation, and CMPD, and in some cases we hire private security to monitor trails and to be on the trails. And so hopefully you're seeing those people out there. From a design perspective, we do follow some crime prevention through environmental design or CPTED policies or design standards. When we are designing the trails, we're trying to think a lot about visibility, about keeping eyes on the trail wherever possible when we're interacting with neighborhoods. And then we have a trail etiquette system, which is also etiquette and recommendation system, which is also on our signage, where we also want to encourage people, if you feel uncomfortable, walk with a friend, take some things, do things maybe differently than you would, because, there are some remote areas on trails, and I prefer to go out with a friend, honestly, when I'm on the trail. And so we usually travel from a staff perspective, and pairs oftentimes as well, particularly before the greenway's built, because that's even worse. You're in the woods, and I was out there today. So definitely some of that. But if you ever need anything, definitely call 911 and use those mile marker systems to alert them to where you are.
Gotcha. And the last question, when it comes to land acquisition requests from developers, you mentioned that it was 5%. Do you guys anticipate that increasing that ask or in the future?
So not right now. I think we just started doing that about 2 or 3 years ago. And so all of those requests historically and still for the parkland are voluntary. So we're just asking, hoping for the best. And we've had some good success on that. Not all of it, obviously. And oftentimes they'll come back with a compromise like, well, what if it's private open space, but we make it publicly accessible? And I'm like, oh, that's better than nothing. So we try to get as much public recreation or public green space as possible, even if we're not owning and maintaining it. With the new UDO, and you guys could probably speak more to this than me, some of the greenway dedications are going to be required through the land development process. But I think some of the parkland dedications will still either be voluntary or will be incentive based.
Okay, those are all my questions. Any other questions, commissioners?
Yeah, I had a question on the land acquisition. So that takes time.
Mhm.
And you've got a vision for the entire greenway system fully built out, presumably. I guess how many, or I guess what percentage of the existing greenway system do we have sort of in inventory waiting for other parcels to kind of come into play? And I guess related to that, we've got 70 some odd miles of greenway now. What do you envision sort of the end state being?
So our full master plan calls for 344 miles of trail. Of that, we have 70 on the ground, and we have about 116 or 117 miles either funded or on the ground. So from a funding standpoint and projecting out what, if we get everything in design built, we'll be about a third of the way to the master plan. For the rest of those projects, last time we ranked them, we typically break up Greenway Trail projects, and it really depends, somewhere between 1 and 3 mile segments per project. That is usually constructible, not only from the scale of our contractors, but usually those are there. You can find a good start and stopping point within that length. And so we took the rest of the Greenway master plan that was unfunded, broke it up into logical projects, which is about, I think, 110 plus potential future projects. And then we went through and inventoried approximately how many parcels we think we might need to make those projects. So that is a spreadsheet that exists somewhere. It's not a science, because in many cases, our Greenway master plan is just a line on a map that follows the creek. And so in that process, we had to make some guesses on which side of the creek we would be on, and a lot of things. And even in design, we may have been planning for 10 years to have one alignment. We get into design and find some significant constraint, and we might have to totally change sides of the creek, and then that opens up additional land needs. So in terms of a full tally, I have no idea. It's a lot, but we know which ones need less.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you so much, Katie.
Okay.
Excellent presentation. I always love to hear from the Parks and Rec. We're gonna have the community area planning update from Kathy Cornett.
Yes, and so I know that you all have seen quite a few of the setup slides, but for the benefit of people who may be watching or watching now or later, I'll just go ahead with the project, a little bit of the project background and engagement update, and then kind of where we're going from here. So overview, I know you all are very familiar with this. We adopted our comprehensive plan, first plan since 1975 in June of 2021. And then our first major implementation item out of that plan was our policy map, which was adopted in March of 2022 at the same time. And that mapped all of the place-based policies within the comprehensive plan. At the same time, we have been developing a UDO. We developed the UDO, and that was adopted in August of 2022. And there is a zoning map project that will be separate but related to our project that is still being developed at this time. So the next implementation item out of the comprehensive plan was community area planning. So we have been undertaking 14 community area plans over a 2-year period. It's a citywide process. So we're bringing all communities up to the same level playing field of guidance at the same time. There are larger geographies that we might normally work with, but it's more efficient. And some of the benefits are facilitating conversations among neighborhoods. And I think we've seen that a lot in the workshops that we've had recently. Next slide. So we are wrapping up phase 2, which is the phase that's talking about tweaks to the policy map as part of community area plan. First phase focusing on the mapping, and the second phase focusing on projects and programs. The expected outcome is 14 area plans that will have a variety of different components in them. We'll have a refined policy map, and also there may be recommended revisions to the comprehensive plan as we move forward. Next slide. So as an engagement update, you all are very familiar with the 3 buckets of engagement: constant, coordinated, and collaborative. The constant being those that are available 24/7, coordinating being some of our more in-person opportunities, and collaborative being the engagement that we do with elected and appointed officials and also our interdepartmental partners. As far as the constant bucket has been our most popular. It's kind of a flipping of the script on the pre-pandemic. The online options are very, very popular. We've gotten incredible amount of website views. The story maps are very popular. The website has a 30% user return rate. Social media, we've had quite a few shares and we've exceeded our goals as far as that goes. The videos continue to be popular. Our newsletters have a 15% share rate. And then we've also used more traditional methods like door hangers and yard signs as well. Coordinated, you all well know that we've been out in the community. We've had 42 workshops with almost 450 participants, the library office hours. We've had about 180 interactions there. And then in a variety of other meetings and capacities, we've had about 1,500 interactions. And then on the collaborative side, we've been to city council, council committee, full planning committee, and joint use task force and the implementation subcommittee multiple times. So how have we received comments? They have come from all of these avenues: workshops, library hours, online, and then other meetings. Next slide. And then a breakdown of those comments. We really were very focused on and intentional about getting comments from the areas that we hear from the least, so west side and east side. As you can see, the west side, we've gotten high numbers in many of those areas, and you can see the distribution. Our last area was South Inner, so that's the tally as of today. That one could grow a little bit as we continue to put those numbers in. By category, you can see that transportation and just capital improvements has been mobility improvements. I'd say have been very popular and risen to the top consistently throughout all of our processes, and also place type refinement. And then you can see the rest of the distribution here. For the project update, as you all know, the first piece of the project was focused on setting the stage. So that produced 14 community area reports that described who lives, works, and plays in each of the geographies, and what are the greatest needs as far as the equitable growth framework is concerned. So access to housing, jobs, daily goods and services, and reducing environmental impacts. And then those are produced into 14 community reports that our staff used in preparing materials for the workshops, and that were also available to the community to learn more about their geography and where they live, and also other geographies. Phase 2 focused on creating great places. And as I mentioned, it's really focused on refinements to the map and how can we better provide access to housing, jobs, goods, and services, and how can we reduce impacts. Each of the focus that came out of this work really kind of rose to 3 basic themes: balancing priorities, confirming the vision, and then enhancing our activity centers. And I'll talk a little bit more about that here in a second. So balancing priorities, we have 10 goals in the comprehensive plan. So there's going to be conflict between goals in certain locations. So this theme really addressed that in a variety of different ways. What can be done when goals conflict, and is there something in the mapping approach that can help amend this? So one example would be neighborhoods adjacent to manufacturing. So there's 2 goals in the plan that each of these address: housing access for all, and then a diverse and resilient economy. But this isn't an ideal condition. So this is one of the themes that we discussed this is one of the items that we discussed under the balancing priorities theme. Next slide. So as an example, that's fine. The next one, confirming the vision, how there are several areas where we may be introducing a new place type, or there may be a change in a place type. Innovation mixed use is a good example of this. And in these cases, the conversation focused more on educating folks around what the place type was, what it was trying to achieve, the goals it was trying to address, and what the community's thoughts about that were. So one example of this, as I mentioned, was innovation mixed use. So we have a number of areas that were at one point manufacturing, but are transitioning to other uses. And so through the mapping approach, the place type that was applied was often the innovation mixed use, which is new, and a lot of times folks didn't completely understand what that meant. So it was an exercise in really educating them that it helped create a more gradual transition, so that manufacturing uses weren't just completely inappropriate. They kind of transition over time. Also, it allows the housing component and trees and more trees, more sidewalks, other components that kind of move it more towards an activity center. And in most cases, folks were very supportive of, they understood better what the place type was trying to achieve, and they were very supportive of it in general. For enhancing activity centers, we know we have 3 different activity centers, if you want to go on it. Thanks. 3 different sizes of activity centers: neighborhood, community, and regional, increasing as in intensity. And they help achieve a variety of goals, but we know that all of our activity centers today don't have all the features that are described in an activity center that you would want to help achieve a 10-minute neighborhood, for example. So from a mapping approach, what are tweaks that we can make to help move that towards that aspiration? So in summary of where we kind of landed in terms of map adjustments in each of these themes, unfortunately, balancing priorities, we really, for the conversation with the community, housing still it rises to the top, as does jobs. And there's not a whole lot that we can do from a mapping perspective that we can change this. So from a place type mapping perspective, there won't be any changes in the map. It'll be more of a conversation in the projects and programs phase that is our next phase. Confirming the vision, we'll have more of a refining of boundaries that comes out of those conversations. And then in enhancing activity centers, there were tweaks that involved absorbing parcels and somewhat refining the boundaries around those. So now that we've completed all of our workshops, the online components, so folks can still make comments online until mid-January. But we are working at a staff level also with our interdepartmental partners to do the same sort of exercise. For example, Park and Rec, since there's been a lot of property acquired during the whole couple of years that we've been working on this, we need to go through and make sure that we have everything categorized correctly and that it's consistent with the park categories in MEC playbook. That's one example, but we'll continue to do that. And then with a goal of releasing a draft map to the public in February, and that will begin a comment period that will last until June of 2024. As far as next steps, we're planning on moving, we're actively planning right now for what happens in phase 3, which is the projects and programs discussion. And as I mentioned, the focus is more on our partners because the projects and programs are really managed by our partner departments. So we are working on that effort right now, and that'll be a conversation around infrastructure and neighborhood amenities. And as a call to action, we continue to ask you to spread the news about the upcoming map, the next phase, and also one piece that we'd like is folks to share images of the community as we begin to develop the document. We'd like to have images that come from community members of their own communities. So if you can encourage folks to do that as well. All of our workshop materials are online. The South Inner ones that we just finished will be up by, I think, the end of the week. And that includes the focus area exercise, recordings of the presentations, the virtual ones, also printable versions, and then the opportunity to comment, to continue to comment online, and then demo videos on how to do that as well. And that's all I have. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Kathy, for all the updates. Any other questions, comments?
No questions, just a comment. Thank y'all for all of that time. I know that you're only partway through the phases, but having attended just 5 or 6 of the workshops, I can tell you that it was a heavy lift by the staff and really very much appreciated all y'all's efforts above and beyond the 9 to 5 workday for all of you.
Thank you.
I'm very impressed that you guys are able to put things into buckets, into bigger buckets. I mean, because the comments and the feedback is so broad or so, I guess, more specific to a particular resident. You know, for you guys to be able to take that and put it into a broad bucket is pretty amazing. So I echo Commissioner Shaw's sentiments. Great work that you guys are doing.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Any other questions, comments? Okay. Well, I will take a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
All right. Well, everyone have a great holiday. I will see you next year.